We're in the Purdue Archives and Special Collections in the vault, and this is where all our collections are stored. This collection came about in 2006 at the request of a Purdue professor here, and he was concerned that all the research that had happened in the 1960s was being lost because the people who were active in that research are getting older, and all their research materials are kind of disappearing, and he thought it would be great if there's a safe place for all this stuff. So his friend Betsy Gordon provided funding to support an archivist to actively collect these materials. And that's how the collection came about, and it's been slowly growing for 6 years, and now we have a representative body of materials that sort of capture how this research came about, how it began, and how it kind of ended in the 1970s, and how it came to life again in the 1990s. LSD was invented by Albert Hofmann in 1938, and then he discovered its psychedelic properties in 1942. That's when he took his famous bicycle ride, the bicycle ride, where he was going home and everything just started to change a little bit, and he realized that this was actually a very, very powerful drug. And in the 1950s, there was some little bits of research with this drug going on, and other psychedelic drugs.
This is a glass of water, colorless, tasteless. It contains 100 gamma of LSD-25, 1/10 of a milligram, the equivalent of 1/600th of a grain. An ounce of this material will make 150,000 such doses. Let us observe the effect some 3 hours later. Well, tell me.
Well, I couldn't possibly tell you. It's here. Can't you feel it? This whole room, everything is in color, and I can feel the air. I can see it. I can see all the molecules.
Yeah, so in the 1950s and 60s, there were some studies going on, and in the 1960s in Czechoslovakia, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, who produced the drug, started this study at a medical school there, of which researcher Stan Grof was involved. And he administered this substance to a lot of people, and discovered a lot of things about it and what to do in these studies and what not to do. And he eventually came to the U.S. and worked at Johns Hopkins in the 1960s. And there was a lot of great research happening there. It was in Baltimore, Maryland, at the Spring Grove State Hospital, which later became the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. That's right where Johns Hopkins is now. And they did studies on alcoholics and schizophrenics and people with nervous disorders, and they did a lot of really good research.
We've had these recent disclosures of the Army and the CIA using the drug on unsuspecting, quote, volunteers, which resulted in more than one suicide and other subjects becoming violent, experiencing recurring nightmares, and so forth. First of all, how can you be sure that your patients will not experience the same thing?
An extremely important difference is that in our particular setting, before a patient is given the drug, he is thoroughly briefed on a number of things that may happen to him during the drug experience. Furthermore, he's not exposed to the drug experience until he's established a comfortable and secure relationship with the psychotherapist.
So here we have some of the greatest hits from the Psychoactive Substances Research Collection. Several people have donated their papers over the past several years, some things we've acquired from rare book dealers. And right here we have just a smattering of some of that early research that was going on. When the consensus wasn't out on whether it was good or not. So here's an article from Scientific American called The Hallucinogenic Drugs, and it has a description sort of for the lay audience and the chemistry of them and how that chemistry of them affects brain chemistry. And here's some articles. This one is by the group at Spring Grove, and they talk about how this drug is an effective means for good therapeutic practice. And it's neat because these are things produced in big journal names. So this is reprinted from the Journal of the American Medical Association, and here's another one from the Harvard Theological Review. So this research started out very well regarded and very serious. This is some memos and reports from the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Timothy Leary worked at Harvard, so this is when he was being good and doing good research. And he did a study called the Concord Prison Project, and he administered LSD to 175 inmates, and it was great. I think it turned out really well for them. The research didn't go that far because, and I've seen this written somewhere, because the inmates got religion, and that made the authorities uncomfortable. But one thing that's really interesting is there's some meeting minutes in here, and we've had to go in and redact the name of the people involved in the study, the people who took the drug. But there are questions come up, and it says, there's problems of trust and distrust, like the people who are taking this drug, and it has one column of the problem and one column of the solution. There's no solution for the trust and distrust, but there is. What is the drug experience like? And the answer is that Dr. Leary described some of his own experiences and some he has observed. Can domestic problems come up and be understood better? Yes, for many people this happens. So it's just kind of a very candid description of what comes up in these sessions and how these people are supposed to react. It's not like they were administering drugs in prison cells. It was a very formal study. They'd go to the hospital in small groups, and this would all happen in the hospital room. But it is interesting to see some of Timothy Leary's research when he was, an academic before it became popular. He wanted to find a treatment so they wouldn't come back to prison, so that sort of cycle would stop. And there's this article, Predicting Recidivism, Base Rates for Massachusetts Correctional Institution, Concord. So it's a 2.5-year follow-up study, and I believe it concludes that their psychedelics experience was really beneficial to them, and it did help them become better people and see themselves kind of in a broader perspective and narrowed into their problems. So over here we have the Gary Fisher papers, and he was active in California, and he did treatment with children suffering from autism, and he had pretty good results. So working with children is, I guess the picture. There's pictures of the children he worked with in his papers, and one of them is Nancy, and this is Nancy, and he just had a lot of success with these children who were very limited in their communication skills, and kind of like there's just things in the paper where they're like kind of like self-abusing themselves, and they're just unable to communicate. Like Nancy has like a bunch of black eyes in these pictures, and because he believed in this research and he worked with these kids, he was able to have some good results. Not good results with everybody, but there were still some marked improvements. So these are session notes from working with one of his patients, and it has the time, the left, and then what happens to the person taking the drug minute by minute. This is in 5 and 10 minute intervals. And then it has his notes, a summary of the first session and the evaluation, the first day follow-up. So how have they changed? Have they changed at all? Have they gotten better? Have they gotten worse? And you see that first-hand account, and these are patient notes. It's very privileged information. This was in the early 1960s, before any counterculture stuff happened. And, it was a drug just like there was any other drug. It didn't have the stigma that it later had. It was coming along really nicely. There was also research going on at Harvard, and that's where Timothy Leary worked. And Timothy Leary had a big personality, and he got really excited about these psychoactive drugs to the point where he kind of crossed the boundary of responsible academic research, and I don't know if you could attribute the counterculture to him, but his work with the drugs and students kind of created a counterculture, and in some ways that the drug was used in an irresponsible manner. And that's when, so the counterculture happened, and everybody got scared and said, no more research with this drug. This is causing too much madness. And so by the 1970s, the research was just closed. The drugs were scheduled, and no research was permitted with them. So all was quiet, and you had a few New Age researchers in the 70s and 80s, and then the research is slowly built and built and built. There's a lot of different studies going on at various institutions, and there's a few going on at Johns Hopkins, a few going on at New York University, a few going on at UCLA, and they all kind of have a different approach, using maybe one substance or another to focus on a different thing. People suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, there's a study for smoking cessation, people with death anxiety who are terminal cancer patients, people with cluster headaches, these ailments that there just hasn't been a remedy for. Psychedelics are becoming very active in solving some of these problems.